Hello and welcome back. It's Leah. I appreciate you being here to listen in on this part of my story. Last time we talked about my second hospital stay, and this is in about May of 2024. Now, if you haven't listened to anything before now, I think it's important to have the context, at least of this part of the story, when I was readmitted to the hospital. And so I do recommend going back and just checking out what I said in the last video, which I'll put in the card thingy. Today, we're going to talk about stuff that I think could be kind of upsetting for folks who are sensitive around topics of disordered eating and restriction and things like that. Just try to exercise some care. I'll talk about it as sensitively as I can, but sometimes just the topic itself can be upsetting for people, and I do want you to practice self-care. So last we left off, we had just had our lovely resident, who's been my antagonist in much of this story, basically have her ass handed to her by her supervising surgeon because she thought that she could get away with giving me no nutrition at all for 2 days. A stark contrast to the first time I was hospitalized, where I was what they call NPO, nothing by mouth. You can't eat, you can't drink, you can't not even water, nothing. So what they did was they had put an IV drip, and they were giving me intravenous fluids, electrolytes, and dextrose, which is a simple sugar that you can break down into energy. So it's sort of like eating, but you're not putting anything through your digestive system, which is a really good solution for someone like myself, who they were trying to make sure nothing was going through my digestive system. That was the first time, but then the second time, after I had shut her down about trying to convince me to get these procedures done that were clearly targeted at me because I was fat, and I just said, no, I'm not interested. And when she finally gave up on that, she basically discharged me without checking up whether my condition was actually resolved. And 3 weeks later, I was back in the hospital. And this time around, I didn't get any dextrose in my drip. And she just kind of, for lack of a better term, she just completely restricted me nutritionally for 2 days. So I had no anything going into my body to give me nutrition, just fluids. After a couple of days, we had the conversation that just had me giddy with glee, where her supervisor was like, so why are you starving her? What's your justification for not letting her have any nutrition at all? And she's like, oh, well, she had pain still. And he's like, oh, in her stomach, she's nauseous. And she's like, well, no. So he just kind of called her out in a really gentle way, but she kind of it was clear that she messed up. It was a moment where I was like, oh, okay, she's petty. I get what's happening right now. Basically, after that, I got brought a tray of food the next meal. And I think it was a lunch that I got. And it was a turkey sandwich or something. It wasn't even I had gone from nothing at all to clear fluids is pretty common. They'll give you things like apple juice, ginger ale, jello, vegetable or chicken or beef broth, just liquids. And they should be clear liquids, not something like milk or something. Oh, hello, kitten. I thought that is what would happen. But no, I got solid food right away. So I'm having my turkey sandwich and so on. What happened with me biologically, what it felt like after that experience, and when I didn't get any kind of nutrition for a couple of days and then I started eating again, is that I had food, and then I felt basically as soon as I had finished that food that I needed more food. And that's not really a feeling that I'm used to. I know there are people who just kind of feel hungry all the time. Oscar has entered the building. After I started eating again, there was this sort of incessant hunger that I had, and that's not something that's really normal for me. I'm not somebody who eats and is immediately hungry again. I eat and then I feel satisfied and then I don't have to eat for a while, I just remember the first time being in the hospital and they had me on the fluids that had the dextrose for nutrition. I went off of that and started eating fluids and stuff. And even though it was fluids and not solid food, I wasn't really hungry, because at no point had I really had any hunger pangs or anything when I was on the dextrose. And then when they transitioned me, even though fluids are not a lot, there's not a lot of substance to them, I had enough sugar in my blood and so on that my body wasn't telling me, oh my God, you're hungry, we're in crisis. Oscar, stop. So I had gone from a situation where I had no like nutrition at all in the IV to solid foods. So you would think like, oh, like my body's gonna be like, yes, this is very satisfying. But actually the exact opposite happened. And my theory, because I'm not a doctor, like I don't know, but my theory based on how it felt from inside my body is that when my body was deprived of any kind of like energy, basically like nutrients and energy for 2 days, it entered a sort of starvation state where it was like, oh no, this is what we planned for. This is what we were storing energy up for. All right, guys, we gotta like find ways to make energy even though she's not taking any into her body, you know? And it sort of got into this like crisis mode where you like create energy from your fat stores and so on. And so when I started putting nutrients and energy back into my body via food, I think what my body did was like, oh, look at that. There's no scarcity anymore. You know what? There could be again, though. There could be again. You know what we should do? We should gather all of that up and store as much as we can for the next time that there's some kind of famine or something. And so that's what it feels like my body was doing. I remember when I came back from the time I was in the hospital the first time. And as I say, I didn't have any like weird feelings around like hunger and like food the first time. And I remember getting home, I'd be in the hospital, I think it was 6 days in total. But I also remember my partner saying to me, and this makes some sense because like there was some wasting that happened because I had to just be so like I was sleeping in bed most of the day, right? When you're in the hospital, you can't just like go out and run your errands and stuff, right? I remember him looking at me and saying like, I think you might be a bit smaller. Like I'm looking at your body and I think like after the hospital, like I think you're a bit smaller. And I said, yeah, I think so too, because like there's just like this shirt that fits a little different, or like there's just a, you know. And so anyway, this was like something we noticed, and I'm not somebody who's like, yeah, man, got smaller. Like that's not sort of the relationship I have with my body. Like I'm happy where I'm at. I go by a model of like, it doesn't help anybody to be like hard on yourself about where you're at right now. So I really just try to embrace my body where it's at. So it wasn't like intentional or anything. It wasn't like a celebration per se. It was just like an observation. When I had the second hospital stay and they had done the thing where they starved me for 2 days and then they gave me food, and I was just like, oh my God, like my partner they would serve lunch at like noon, and my partner would come at 2 or something. I'd be like, oh my God, you have to go to Tim Hortons and get me like, not a snack, like a meal. I am so hungry. Like, and I had just eaten lunch at noon. That is not normal for me. If I have a big meal, I don't really snack a lot in between meals. If I have like little munchies, then yes, I kind of like munch throughout the day. But that's not really how you eat in the hospital. They bring you something at like, I think it's like 7 a.m., noon, and like 5 p.m. or something like that. And that's it. That's when you eat. And so having those full meals, I wasn't really in a snacker scenario for me normally. But I was just like absolutely ravenous. I remember my partner being like, okay, yeah, like sure, whatever, you know, like, and he would go and he would get me like a sandwich, or like, I think they had like pizzas or something at that time. I think they might still have those. And so he was like getting me like actual like substantial amounts of food from whatever like place there was nearby that sold food. And then I would eat that as well because I was so hungry. So it really messed with kind of my hunger signals for a while. That's gone away. That's long since gone away. But for a couple of days, my body was just like, I need everything. I need to have like twice what I'm used to. I need to have like, you know, like it was just telling me to eat all the time. And I got out of the hospital the second time. My partner was like, so you remember how the first time you were smaller? I think this time you're larger. And I was like, I agree with that. Cause again, like my this pair of pants does not fit the same, or, you know, whatever. It was really fascinating to me that they were like, let's starve her to make her thin. And then literally it did the exact opposite. It just gave me like more further confirmation that like, it's not that I'm just doing something terribly wrong, that like my body has a certain size where it sort of stays normally. And then it's actually these like really weird, and I gotta say, like, dysfunctional and disordered things that were prescribed, like restricting ourselves really heavily in what we eat, like exercising a ton and like all of that stuff. I didn't do any of that the first time, and I became smaller. And the second time they tried to have me doing that more, and they did have me, I was sort of like wandering about the hallways with my rollator a lot more and stuff the second time. So I was like doing more exercise. This was after a period of just like having no food at all. So by these ideas, when I was having no food at all, I was still not smaller. I was the same size, or, like I didn't get any comment at all from my partner. And like, we do kind of keep tabs on that. Like if he notices differences, he's not like afraid to tell me. It just kind of confirmed for me that it's not that I'm just like doing everything wrong. It's not just that like I'm that silly, not very smart, fat person who like, it's just so simple. I just have to not eat, and I just have to like run around and like do a bunch of exercise, and then I would be thin. It's like, no, like actually like eating on a regular basis and just like doing what I can is where I stay at a certain size. And then like messing with food in the way that they did actually kind of put my body into crisis and made it want to kind of like store up everything it could. Because that's essentially what fat is. It's stores for the future. And like, if you tell your body that there's scarcity, like bodies are so good. That's like exactly the point, is that like, they're doing their best. They're like, I don't want you to be without. So if there's extra, I stick it in fat stores so that if there's ever like the opposite of extra, if there's ever a scarcity, that we can rely on that to get you through it. My body doesn't know that like I'm fat enough that I probably have enough stores for quite a long time if it really came to that. It's just doing its best, right? It's just trying to plan for the future, and it's trying to keep me safe. And I remember having a thought, when I came out of the hospital, and I had just had this day where the resident had just kind of decided I shouldn't be allowed to have any kind of food in my IV or anything. Realizing that doing that kind of put my body in crisis, into starvation mode. And I just kind of like, because my body does so much for me, and I have a really good relationship with my body. Like I really appreciate my body. And I just remember feeling so like sad and angry that she put my body through that, because it didn't deserve that. All it's trying to do is keep me safe, and it's always been good to me. She just thought she could put it in crisis because my guess is she's grossed out looking at me, which is sort of the attitude that I get all the time for being fat, right? Like, you being grossed out looking at my body is not a reason for you to traumatize my body, to put my body into this like really stressed out condition where it's in like crisis mode and it's worried that I'm going to starve and everything. Like, that's not treating my body well. That's not respecting my body. And it's also like, I was advocating really hard for having some kind of something in my IV just to like nourish me and keep my body working well. And they just didn't listen to me. And so like, to me, it really also throws into question the idea of medical consent. It's like, you don't have any good reason for starving me. If I had been waiting for a surgery or something, before a surgery, there are reasons you might have to completely fast. I wasn't waiting for any of that. I already had the procedure done, like there was no medical justification for what she was doing. To not even give me a say in that, I think it feels violating, it feels like she's imposing her own judgments on my body and deciding what my treatment should be, and not giving me a say in it. And that's not really how the medical system is supposed to work. So I really didn't appreciate that. My second hospital stay, because I had the drain in my abscess, it was sort of thought that would take care of itself. So you have a built-in mechanism where like, if it fills with fluid, the fluid will come out in the drain. So I don't think they put me in a CT, like put in a CT scan for me before they discharged me the second time. But I did have like pretty thorough instructions on how to care for the drain. Like I had to go every few days to have the dressing changed and things like that. And so all of that was like pretty thorough. and pretty well taken care of. I felt like the second time around, in terms of the actual medicine, it was a lot more complete than the first time around, where they just kind of were like, well, she doesn't want to do what we say, even though what we say has nothing to do with her current condition. So we're just going to discharge her. And they hadn't like checked to make sure that the condition had actually resolved or anything. And of course it had not. And that's why I was back in the hospital in like 3 weeks. I did feel a lot more positive about the actual medical outcomes the second time. I just was really annoyed at the whole I'm gonna starve you just because I want to that came from the resident. That was my second hospital stay. Oh my God. There was like so many funny stories throughout like the various times that I was in the hospital where I had just like these like wild roommates and stuff. And I remember kind of like when you're in the hospital, you get really bored. And so I remember kind of just like storing up these stories in my brain until like whenever my partner arrived that day to visit me and be like, okay, so here's the drama for today. And just sort of like telling him about all of the like funny things that happened and so on. I would say that like actually being in the hospital, I'm not terrible at keeping my spirits up and so on. I think like the best part, hands down, is the staff. Like the nurses and the orderlies and the PSWs. I really appreciated how compassionate the care was day to day. And I just honestly, I can't say enough good things about like the nurses and the staff. They were amazing. So I went home anyway. And after I went home, I had to come back in a few weeks for a follow-up with the surgeon guy. And this is the older guy who I described last time as like, if like Mario from Mario Brothers had like white hair and he was like old and he was just this like little Italian man. He wasn't super tall, like he was kind of short and he had like the gray hair and the mustache and everything at one point. So I haven't really disclosed exactly where my drain was, but because the problem was in my large intestine, and that's like right at like your pelvis, you can assume that my drain was in a kind of like a personal area. You know, like I had to have various, like, as I say, dressing changes and stuff. And like, I pretty much always had to take my panties down and stuff for them to reach it properly. Yeah. Just like to give you a heads up, I'm not just like unhinged for what I'm about to tell you. But, so I went in to see this like older doctor for like a follow-up. He was like my assigned surgeon, right? So he wanted to see like, how's the drain doing? And if it's not really getting anything out anymore, then we can just remove it and, you know, it should heal up and you'll be fine. And so anyway, I went in, he's like, okay, let's look at the drain. And because I had been sort of poked and prodded and like every time I had to have the dressing changed or anything done, I would just basically have to like drop my drawers. I was like, okay. And I just dropped them in the office. And he was like, let's get you a blanket or something to cover you. And I was like, oh, right. Not everybody is as comfortable with this process as I have become, you know? And so it was kind of funny. He was just like kind of taken aback by just how like not ashamed I was to just drop trow and stuff. And anyway, so I just found that really funny. And I wanted to add that on as kind of just like a funny story at the end because we had kind of a serious video today. Yeah, and I got the drain out and it was, it healed up well. Spoiler alert, there will be a third hospitalization. And that is in an upcoming video. You know, my first video, I really lambasted my doctor. Leading up to my third hospitalization, she was actually really great. And I want to make sure that I'm not just talking about the bad stuff, that I give her credit for like really the growth and like increased trust in our relationship where like we have good interactions now, really good interactions now. And, so anyway, I'm going to talk a bit about that as well prior to getting into like the actual third hospitalization. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now.